Hackman's departure wasn't a nonviolent go-out from the sector. It turned into the start of a hurricane, a storm fueled via an $80 million fortune, hidden investments, and a monetary trail so complicated that even the ones closest to him had no idea what they were approximately to discover. His demise did not just leave in the back of recollections of a Hollywood legend. It ignited a own family struggle that nobody saw coming. At first, the news of his passing felt surreal. For decades, Hackman have been greater of a myth than a person. A Hollywood ghost who disappeared into the quiet hills of Santa Fe, far, far from the cameras and the chaos of celeb lifestyles. He had no social media presence, no public appearances, no choice to relive the golden days of his profession. His final years had been spent in seclusion, writing novels, driving his bicycle via the dusty trails of New Mexico, and dwelling in a home that barely hinted at his wealth. But in the back of closed doors, Hackman wasn't simply a growing older actor playing retirement. He'd become playing a distinct sort of position, the mastermind of an economic empire that no one may want to have expected. The first clue came when his circle of relatives, looking ahead to an honest inheritance system, handed a chain of files that advised a completely different story. His legit will, an vintage handwritten notice from 2001, indexed a modest property, a residence in Santa Fe, a financial institution account in California. The record located his predicted belongings at much less than $5 million, in quantity shockingly low for a person who had spent a long time in Hollywood and starred in some of the largest films of his technology. But when his own family and prison crew started out digging deeper, the illusion shattered. Buried in a garage unit, locked away in a vintage timber chest, had been information that painted a completely distinctive photograph. There have been letters, monetary statements, and notes detailing investments that stretch back a long time. Real property, inventory holdings, anonymous funds, properties spread so thin across more than one bills that piecing them collectively felt like solving a puzzle with lacking pieces. Hackman hadn't honestly earned a Hollywood fortune. He had quietly built an economic empire inside the shadows, one that had gone neglected for years. The numbers have been stunning. For Superman alone, he had acquired a paycheck of $2 million in 1978, a sum equal to over $9 million in present-day bucks. For The Quick and the Dead and Lucky Lady in 1975, he changed into paid $1.5 million every, and his salary for The French Connection in 1971 became $100,000, a small sum at the time, but one that helped propel his career into Hollywood's maximum paid ranks. By the 90s, Hackman was without problems earning seven figures in line with function, collecting hundreds of thousands in field workplace bonuses, endorsements, and long-term royalties. And yet, despite such earnings, his fortune had remained a thriller. Initially, the expected wealth uncovered became around $20 million, which already raised questions. Why became there any such giant gap between his lifetime profits and his declared assets? But as greater files surfaced, the determined kept hiking: hidden financial institution bills in Nevada, undeclared land holdings, tech investments underneath shell groups. It all pointed to one factor: Hackman hadn't simply been quietly living out his final years, he were orchestrating a financial legacy that nobody turned into organized for. By the time investigators completed adding up the property, the full wealth exceeded $80 million. But the real surprise wasn't just in the amount, it became inside the secrecy. Hackman had designed his financial web in a manner that ensured no person had direct access to the full photograph. Even his closest circle of members have been blindsided. His three youngsters from his first marriage had assumed that, notwithstanding their rocky courting, they would inherit the bulk of his wealth. But now, not anything became positive. Where did all this cash pass? And more importantly, who became supposed to acquire it? Tensions commenced growing straight away. Old conflicts that had been buried for years all of a sudden resurfaced. Hackman's children had continually felt a sure distance from their father, a man who became greater devoted to his work than his circle of relatives. From the outdoor, it regarded like a normal Hollywood fulfillment tale. Hackman married his first spouse, Faye Maltese, in 1956, long earlier than he became a celeb. They started out their life in a cramped New York apartment with no warm water, scraping via whilst he chased in a performing profession that often regarded more like a delusion than an actual opportunity. By the time he broke via within the late 60s, the entirety changed, except for one factor: he became in no way domestic. He changed into filming throughout the USA, once in a while the world over, shifting from set to set, role to role, at the same time as Faye raised their 3 children. Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie, nearly entirely on her personal. Hackman knew it. He admitted years later that his profession had come on the fee of fatherhood, but returned then. He wasn't thinking about missing birthdays or school recitals. He became chasing the dream and the cash. And as soon as the provide commenced rolling in, he couldn't say no. You spend so many years trying desperately to be identified as having the skills, he as soon as admitted. And then when you're beginning to be provided those elements, it's very tough to turn something down. That turned into the battle. How do you walk far from an opportunity when you've labored your whole lifestyles for it? Hackman selected Hollywood, and his youngsters paid the rate. Christopher, his most effective son, took it the hardest. As a baby, he idolized his father. However, that admiration slowly was resentment. When he wanted assist, Hackman wasn't there. When he had questions, Hackman changed into off-filming. The distance among them grew through the years, no longer with fights or arguments, but with silence. Hackman admitted he misplaced touch with Christopher early on, and that by the time he realized how plenty his son needed him, it changed into already too late. Their relationship never absolutely recovered. Christopher in large part stayed out of the general public eye, averting interviews, warding off Hollywood, and keeping off his father's reputation altogether. When Hackman divorced Faye in 1986, any final connection appeared to fade absolutely. Christopher wasn't visible at premieres, wasn't photographed with his father, and over the years, it was as if he had disappeared from Hackman's lifestyles absolutely. His daughters, Elizabeth and Leslie, had a barely specific experience. They weren't as estranged as their brother, but the emotional gap became usually there. Hackman could every so often take them to premieres, allowing them to catch a glimpse of his global, but they had been spectators, no longer members. Growing up, they had to navigate lifestyles with a father whose achievement forged a protracted shadow. Elizabeth, the eldest, struggled the maximum with it. Hackman himself admitted that, "My achievement always striking over their heads made things difficult." She attempted to carve her own course, however. There has been no escaping it. Everywhere she went, she became Gene Hackman's daughter. That turned into the identification given to her before she could create her very own. Leslie, the youngest, had the nearest courting along with her father in later years, however. Even that became complicated. She turned into the one who stayed in touch, the one who spoke to him the maximum, but while his body changed into found in his Santa Fe home, weeks had handed since their remaining verbal exchange. That became the truth in their dating. It was better than earlier then, but it was never really near. The turning point came while Hackman married his second spouse, Betsy Arakawa, in 1991. Betsy was extraordinary. She changed into more youthful. She wasn't from Hollywood, and most significantly, she desired Hackman to reconnect along with his children. She recommended own family visits, invited them to their domestic in New Mexico. And slowly, matters started to alternate. For the first time in years, there had been circle of relatives gathering. Hackman had become a grandfather, and people moments intended something to him. He wasn't the equal man he'd become within the 70s and 80s. He was older, wiser, and beginning to apprehend what he had missed. But time has a merciless manner of making up for misplaced years. No, remember how a lot he attempted? There have been some things he couldn't undo. That's why, whilst his will became revealed after his dying, The anxiety became on the spot. Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie were not just combating for an inheritance. They have been unraveling a thriller. The economic files they determined didn't just trace a hidden wealth. They revealed an empire, and at the middle of that empire, real estate, masses of it. Let's begin with the Santa Fe mansion, the residence in which he and Betsy Arakawa lived out their final years. Sitting on 12 acres of pristine New Mexico panorama, the property became a castle of privateness. Cautiously designed to be his breakout from the world, he had bought the assets in the 80s for an undisclosed quantity, returned when Santa Fe nevertheless felt like an untouched frontier for Hollywood elites seeking to vanish. And vanish he did. The residence, a 4-bedroom Southwestern-style retreat, became greater than only a home. It became an announcement. Hackman individually oversaw renovations, remodeling an antique 1950s block-style house into something immediately out of an architectural dream. Exposed wooden beams, distressed plaster walls, stamped tin ceilings, each element become intentional. Hackman had a thing for illusion. He didn't want the residence to look new. He wanted it to look lived in, aged with the aid of time. Even the partitions were altered to reveal years of wear and tear, as if generations had surpassed through.